For decades, Venezuelans have not been able to freely express their political opinions without fear of repression or retribution. Maduro's regime relentlessly cracked down on opposition and dissidents, shutting off virtually all channels for political dissent. In 2024, exit polls correctly projected that Edmundo Gonzalez would win by a landslide, a prediction that turned out to be true once voter records showed Gonzalez had won 67% of the vote. Polling, at the absence of other avenues to express political opinion, has proven, when done right, like the results to be shared today, to accurately reflect Venezuelan sentiments about their country and their hopes and aspirations for it. Good morning, all, and thank you for joining us this morning for this incredibly timely and important conversation, whether you're here in the room or whether you're watching us via ACTV. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President and Senior Director at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsht Latin America Center. Today, I'm thrilled to unveil the results from the first in-person polling done in Venezuela since U.S. forces removed Maduro from power. The poll was designed to understand attitudes about Venezuelans regarding Maduro's removal and the opinions on the aftermath of U.S. policy. I can tell you now the results are very interesting. This event is part of our Venezuela Forward series, which is the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center's steady stream of Venezuela-focused programming, where we cut through uncertainty and shed light and pathways forward for the country's future with a focus on economic stabilization and democratic transition. Today's discussion will center around what people in Venezuela truly think about the situation in their country and what they want to happen in their country in this time of great opportunity, but yet uncertainty at the same time. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome our speakers and panelists. Mark Fierstein will kick off the event by presenting the findings and the poll carried out by his firm, Gold Glove Consulting. Very timely because spring training has started. Mark is a Mets fan, so we'll see what happens over the course of the baseball season. Mark is also a senior advisor at DGA Albright Stonebridge Group. Then we'll reflect on the findings in a panel that I'll chair with Miguel Pizarra, Iria Boyosa, and Luz Meli Reyes. You can ask questions, whether via text, audio, or video at askac.org, and those questions will be addressed throughout today's conversation. So with that, I want to welcome Mark to the stage to present the findings of his incredibly insightful poll. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you, Jason. I would note that even more important than spring training starting is that next month at the World Baseball Classic, Venezuela has a very, very strong team. The United States is a strong team, so I hope you'll all be watching if you're not going down to Miami. But I very much appreciate the opportunity to share the findings of my latest poll in Venezuela. Grateful to those of you who've come out here in person as well as online. So the objective of the poll was pretty simple, to give a voice to the Venezuelan people as folks in Washington and elsewhere discuss the country's fate. And I'm hopeful that policymakers, journalists, politicians, civil society, and others will find it of value. Now, the first question I often get is it possible to do accurate polling in Venezuela? And the short answer is yes. And we know that, as Jason noted, from the history and accuracy of recent polling. In advance of the 2024 election, for example, pollsters projected that Edmundo Gonzalez would defeat Nicolás Maduro by some 30, 40 points. And he did. In advance of the 2023 opposition primary, we knew that Maria Corina Machado was going to win handily. The polls showed that, and that, in fact, is what took place. So even in a very, very difficult environment, Venezuelans feel comfortable talking to pollsters at their doorstep, telling the pollsters who they're going to vote for, what they think about different political figures, and how they're assessing various issues. So with that, why don't we turn to the methodology of this particular poll, and I'll explain why I have faith in these numbers. Let's see, make sure the clicker works. Perfect, okay. So we interviewed 1,000 Venezuelans. This is a nationwide survey. It was conducted face-to-face. This is the first face-to-face survey, as Jason noted, since the capture of Nicolás Maduro You may have seen a couple of other polls. There was a couple online polls, a phone poll. It's very difficult to get accurate samples in Venezuela using online and phone methodology. Face-to-face is a superior methodology there. The poll was done nationwide, big cities, small towns, rural areas, so the coverage was quite good. It's obviously complicated and logistically to get interviewers out. And in fact, our poll was delayed for a bit because of the security situation on the ground, but ultimately things eased up and we were able to deploy the interviewers. The poll was fielded the last week of January. Now, if I were to write the questionnaire today, it would be a bit different than what I wrote 3 weeks ago. Things are happening there so quickly, but that said, I think the data we have is still of great use. So I did the questionnaire, did the analysis, but worked with a Venezuelan firm to do the interviews. I'm not going to name that firm today for security reasons, but worked with one of the leading firms in the country. We had 2 sponsors for the poll. One is the Zampa Foundation, which is a foundation based in Switzerland, which promotes democracy and human rights. And then the second is Pragmatic Panic, which is an NGO in Washington, which manages a Peace Builder grant fund. Now, the sample is geographically representative of Venezuela. It is consistent with the census and census estimates. It is demographically representative. And most important, it is politically representative. And what I mean by that is we asked in the survey how people voted in 2024. It's actually the first piece of data I looked at when we got the results. And what we found is that the way people reported how they voted in 2024 aligned with the actual results as we understand them, which is to say that Mundo Gonzalez got 65 to 70% of the vote, and our sample reflects that as well. The margin of error on a 1,000-person sample would be about 3.1. And then throughout this presentation, I'll be presenting the overall results, but also I'll be talking about 3 segments, political segments. And we ask people how they identify. Are they independent? Are they Chavista? Are they opposition? And there's some pretty interesting results. Obviously, there's some differences among those 3 groups, but you'll see some similarities as well, some consensus. So before I jump into the actual numbers, just want to underscore a few key findings from the poll. So first, Venezuelans are feeling pretty good about things right now. They are pleased that Nicolás Maduro will face accountability. They are very hopeful about the future, and this is certainly the first time in many, many years that they are feeling this way. That said, they have certain concerns. The economy is by far the top priority, as you'll see. They are nervous about the state of security in the country, and of course, there is uncertainty about the political future. But for now, the public is quite pragmatic. They accept the current political realities. They understand why Delcy Rodriguez is acting president. They understand why the United States is working with her. As you'll see, there's very strong support for U.S. policy, what the United States has done and what it could do. Now, all that said, Venezuelans want a more accelerated political transition. Specifically, they want presidential elections this year. And if those elections were to be held, Maria Corina Machado would win them handily. She's the only popular political figure in the country. Now, at the same time, Venezuelans are reserving judgment on Delcy Rodriguez. They don't like her personally, but many approve of how she's performing as president under U.S. pressure thus far. We found as well that there's currently little appetite for reconciliation or forgiveness. That said, I would probably expect that the same pragmatism that we see today would likely prevail in the future if compromises need to be made to advance a democratic transition. And then, as I noted, political affiliation, not surprisingly, drives opinion, but you'll see is a fair amount of consensus across the political divide as well. So let's jump to the data. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to share the full presentation today, but I will share it online afterward in both English and Spanish. So as I noted, Venezuelans are pretty hopeful about the future, and obviously the backdrop to everything we'll be talking about here is what happened on January 3rd, and you'll see here the majority supports what the United States did on January 3rd. Of course, a big political divide there. Chavistas aren't so excited about the capture of Maduro, but the opposition certainly is, and most independents are as well. And As a result of Maduro's ouster, a vast majority of Venezuelans now see things going in the right direction. And you see there on the left, I have data from June 2024. That's actually the last poll that I had done there. And at that time, about a quarter of Venezuelans thought that things were going in the right direction. And that was a figure we had seen for many, many years. And I've seen other polls. It was consistent up until January 3rd. Now that's flipped. 3/4 of Venezuelans say that the country is going in the right direction. You wouldn't get numbers like that really almost anywhere in the world. Now, I think this is obviously a number worth monitoring in the coming months. Does it hold or does it decline? Now, this hope is tempered, of course, by the fact that politically at least, not much has changed. Sorry, let's go back here. So we want to get a sense of how people are perceiving Delcy Rodriguez, whether she represents any sort of a change from Maduro. So we asked folks, would you say that she represents a very significant change, somewhat, just a little, or no change at all? And you see the largest answer there is the no change at all. So if you add no change at all, plus just a small change, then 2/3 of people see her at best as representing just a little bit of change. Now, beyond that, people are also quite concerned about the security situation. A majority of Venezuelans believe it's actually worsened since January 3rd. And again, you see some consensus there among our three groupings. As you will see, this is not about crime. This is a sort of a different security dynamic in the country. And when we turn to the overall concerns people have, so we presented a list here of 10 issues. We asked Venezuelans, which should be the top two priorities, and you see the economy by far is number one, cost of living, affordability, if you will. And then if you add that to the third concern, which is jobs, obviously the economy is the dominant concern. Healthcare pops as well. And you'll note what factors in fairly low there: democracy, human rights, crime. Crime at one point, a few years ago, was very, very high. It has declined significantly over time as a concern in the country. Now, economic recovery for Venezuelans today is a higher priority than democratic consolidation. Though I want to be a little bit careful with this interpretation. Arguably, is it a false choice? In my view, it's a false choice, and many Venezuelans would agree. So what you see here is when you force people to choose between economic recovery and democratic consolidation, by 8-1, they choose the economy. Now, we just offered those two choices. Some people volunteered the option of both. And as you see among opposition folks, for example, even more people said both than economic recovery. So again, I think we need to be a little bit careful with the interpretation. That said, if pushed, the economy does trump democracy for the time being. Now, as I noted, Venezuelans are fairly pragmatic about the current political realities. Now, on the one hand, you look on the right there, they don't like Delcy Rodriguez. She has a 23% favorable rating, 3/4 have an unfavorable rating of her. And you compare that to Maria Corina, compare that to Edmundo. Obviously, the latter two are much more popular. That said, I was surprised when we asked people who should have succeeded Maduro, Delcy or Edmundo. You get a fairly even response there. And I think what it is that people understand why it might not have been feasible to install Edmundo Gonzalez as president in the immediate aftermath of January 3rd. Similarly, we're seeing acceptance of the U.S. engaging with the Venezuelan government. We presented two statements here. By working with the current Venezuelan government, the United States can move Venezuela in a better direction without risking instability, or is undermining the opportunity for a transition to democracy or economic recovery. You see many more people said it can help move the country in a better direction. People have faith in the United States in this case. And you see, again, a consensus, interesting enough, among the three political groupings. Now, there is very, very strong support for what the United States has done and for what the United States is doing and what it can do, as you will see. So what we did, we presented a list of demands that the United States has made of the Venezuelan government, and we asked for each of these whether people approve or disapprove. And you see sort of the top three gets sort of consensus across the board, sort of non-controversial things. Basically, almost every Venezuelan approves of the top three. So stopping drug flows, eventually holding elections and respecting the result, releasing political prisoners. So you get 90% support for all of those. If you look at the intensity there, the darker is the people who say they strongly approve. You get about 3/4. So nothing controversial there. Then the other three, you still get majority support, 2/3 majority, but it's not across the board. So expelling Cuban and Iranian advisors, allowing the U.S. to oversee the sale of oil and distribution of revenue, ceasing the sale of sanctioned oil to U.S. adversaries like China and Cuba. Clearly, and I'm sure our panel will be discussing this, nationalism is not a great force, or anti-Yankeeism is not a great force today in Venezuela. So there's also a lot of comfort that people have with other actions the United States could take. So we offered a list here, and again asked people's opinion on each one. Military strikes against drug trafficking or other criminal groups operating in Venezuela gets you 3/4 support, and then you get majority support for imposing additional sanctions on Venezuelan officials, capturing other officials facing indictments in the United States, and continuing to seize Venezuela's oil tankers to limit the sale of Venezuelan oil by the government. I don't show it here, but it's striking that with regard to the strikes against the drug trafficking and other criminal groups, a plurality of Chavistas support that as well, which is pretty remarkable. That said, there is one step the United States could take that wouldn't be all that popular, which is deploying troops. We asked if respondents would support or oppose the U.S. deploying troops to maintain order in the event of civil unrest or an outbreak of violence. Now, that said, you still get 43%, about 2 out of 5 Venezuelans are saying, sure. Among opposition supporters, you get 2/3 of them would welcome U.S. troops, but overall, there's a plurality opposing that idea. Now, as I noted, Venezuelans want a more accelerated transition, political transition, and specifically, they want elections this year. We asked, when do you think the next presidential election should be held? We gave 3 options: this year, next few years, or 2030, when Maduro's and Delcy's mandate would be ending, and 2/3 say they want election this year. Roger Noriega wrote an important piece on this, the Miami Herald, about the importance of elections soon. And you clearly see the opposition. Yes, almost everybody says elections this year. Independents, Chavistas are a bit less enthusiastic about early elections. If those were to take place, Maria Corina Machado would win easily. In other words, the result would look pretty much like it did, like it turned out in 2024. Maria Corina remains the dominant political figure in the country. This has been true for a number of years now. And here I present the favorability and unfavorable ratings for each of the Venezuelan figures that we had in the poll. Maria Corina's numbers are very good, 52-44. It's pretty much where she's been the last few years. And obviously that's it's a good figure for any political figure anywhere, but in a context where the political class is pretty much reviled, that is a very, very strong figure. Edmundo's numbers are perfectly fine. So Delcy's before, Maduro even worse than Delcy, Cabello even worse than Maduro. Padrino sort of matches Cabello, and not a lot of support for Enrique Capriles. Now, at the same time, however, people are reserving judgment on Delcy Rodriguez. And this was actually the most surprising finding in the poll to me. And there are a few numbers here that jump out at me. So first, so we asked, how would you rate Delcy Rodriguez's performance as president so far? So it comes out even, 37-41. So we saw before they don't really like her, but it appears that under U.S. pressure, many people think she's doing the right thing. The second number that jumped out at me was the don't knows. That is a very, very high don't know. The don't knows for every other question was much lower. So you have 1/5 of the people are saying, not so sure yet, reserving judgment. And then, even more surprising, at least to me, was among people who told us they voted for Edmundo in 2024, 1/5 give Delcy an excellent or good rating. Now again, this was last week of January. How will these numbers change? How will they change already? How will they change in the coming months? I think that is a big question. And then finally, to wrap up here, as I noted, Venezuelans are not really in a forgiving or conciliatory mood at the moment. So we tested a few measures, a few ideas have been bandied about to help advance a transition that could be points of discussion in negotiations between the regime and opposition, the idea of amnesties, the Chavistas maintaining control over the military, including Chavistas in any future democratic government. This is the share of people who oppose. So you see about 2/3 majority support, oppose all these things. But again, it would not surprise me if, in fact, there were negotiations and the opposition had to sell certain ideas to help advance a transition that, again, the same pragmatism that we're seeing today would prevail in the future. So those are just a few of the highlights of the survey. I will post the fuller presentation in English and Spanish sometime today. But I think a lot more important than how some gringo interprets this data, we want to hear from some Venezuelan experts, and looking forward to hearing from all of them. And I assume that at least some of them will correct me, will chide me, but I welcome that as well. So, thanks.
Coming to correct you now.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you. And I'll also share with the audience that Mark could have probably spent an hour given those presentation results, but we're to boil it down to about 15, 20 minutes. So, Mark, excellent results. And those, as Mark said, we'll also have those results up on the AtlanticCouncil.org website as well. I think they'll be within the embedded within the event page of this event. So thanks again, Mark, and we'll pull out some of those results here. I want to also, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, you can submit those questions, whether you're here in the audience or whether you're online at askac.org. Again, that could be via text, via audio, or if you're brave enough, over video as well. We'll play the video here behind me. I'm pleased to now be able to moderate this panel with our three speakers, and let me go ahead and introduce them. Next to me is Iria Poyosa. Iria is a colleague, a senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council at our Democracy and Tech Initiative, and does fantastic work kind of globally on these issues and specifically focused on Venezuela. Among other things in Iria's background, she's also a former faculty at the Universidad Central in Caracas. Next to Iria, Miguel Pizarro. No stranger to the stage here. Miguel is a number of different titles, we'll say for today, a member of Venezuela's unitary platform.
We can keep it there.
We'll keep it there. Okay, so that's the title we'll have for today. And then joining us virtually from Texas is Luz Meli Reyes, a Venezuelan journalist and co-founder and director of an excellent publication that I'm sure many of you read here, Efecto Cucuyo. And so thank you so much, Luz Meli, for joining us from Texas. Mark, I have a number of questions to drill down on some of the different findings that Mark presented, but I want to start with a first kind of broad reflection from each of the panelists. As Mark noted at the outset, the poll showed broad support for U.S. policy, showed optimism, showed a desire for an accelerated transition, showed that Maria Corina Machado is quite popular in Venezuela. It also showed, Mark said at the end, a surprising, this cautious view to Delcy Rodriguez, and so far as her mandate thus far. Again, this was a couple weeks ago. But I'd like to start, before I drill into specific questions, just any general reflections first from the panel, and maybe Iria, because you've got the hot seat in the middle. I'll start with you.
Thank you, Jason. Well, in general, the poll is consistent with what we have been hearing from the Venezuelan population in different channels, particularly what I monitor social media and WhatsApp group conversations, and the feelings expressed are quite similar. People were looking forward to United States aid in Venezuela, and they welcomed it when it happened in January 3rd. People had some reservations about Delcy Rodriguez being in power, but understand they decided to back the process of the three states outlined. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So that is consistent with what we are hearing from the population, what we are seeing in our monitoring. The only thing I cannot find different than what I'm hearing in the space I monitor is the issue of security. Most people I have been told, and the conversations I've been monitoring in WhatsApp or social media, people feel more secure now. I guess it had to do with the timing. Maybe probably was too close to the events and people were still shaking. But as the date evolved, what we are seeing is people feel more confident about talking about politics and attending events about politics. We have seen the public demonstrations again. So that is a sense of, there is some boundaries we can push.
And Iria, we'll drill down a little bit more on security throughout the course of this panel. So thanks for those initial reactions. Miguel.
Yeah, super short, Jason. First, thanks to Atlantic Council for Joanne and Mark for running this poll. I think what comes across all the answers is hope. And what we have right now as Venezuelans is a clear sense of hope that things can change and change for good. What you see there is support to the U.S. policy towards Venezuela because we Venezuelans feel that it's completely aligned with our desire of freedom, democracy, and mostly with this process that we started with the primaries back in 2023. In difference to a lot of analysis on the U.S. that start seeing Venezuela after the military deployment in the coast, for us Venezuelans, this is a process that started way back when we elected Maria Corina in primaries, then when we appointed Edmundo González Urrutia as the substitute candidate for July 28 elections, and then all the pressure that we has helped to build up until this moment that has now Maduro in a prison cell in New York, Venezuelans optimistic about what comes in the future, and a Washington, D.C. conversation around future democracy, elections, and institutions, and not about how bad and how horrible the situation on the ground is, which is when you are Venezuelan, having new problems means that you are making some kind of progress. And now we are finally having a whole different set of issues to deal with that even when are challenging is way different to what we were doing 4 months ago. So I think hope for the future is the main message of this poll.
Excellent. Thanks, Miguel. Luz Meli, your initial reactions.
You know that I am a journalist, so I always try to resume and highlight the things that I'm watching now. And now I would say that in Venezuela there is a extraordinary situation, and the regime, the dictatorship, going to say, "Gringo, go home," a gringo, come home. And I would like to pay attention to this because this poll showed that a lot of people is supporting the action of the United States government, but we are not seeing any celebration in Venezuela, which means that the fears of Venezuelan people to express the opinion, to express the thought, is still there. Because if a lot of people, more than 70 people, more than 55 people support the option and they are agree with the government of the United States, how we can see this kind of expression on the street, even that we are celebrating the carnivals in Venezuela, and there were no one of custom of this kind of expression. So for me, the most important thing here is not, the more surprising is not that the people is supporting the option, but the fact that the dictatorship is continuing and all the repression of dictatorship is still in Venezuela.
Great, thank you so much, Luz Meli. And I think we'll drill down on that further when we look into the results of the security questions that Mark raised. Miguel, I want to drill down as we look kind of more in depth at some of the results in the poll. One of the results, as Mark showed, was that that if Maria Corina ran for president today, she would win in an absolute landslide. What is your initial reaction to this? And also, how in your perspective, should her team take advantage of this momentum at this time?
Yeah, first, I think this is not a surprise for anyone who has been following Venezuela or working around Venezuela. Maria Corina Machado, since the primary election, has become not only the most important leader in the country, also the unifying leader in the country. Opposite to what a lot of media reports wants to portray about the opposition movement in Venezuela, like extreme right-wing conservative movement, we are a super diverse coalition. And Maria Corina has managed not only to gather the old school opposition forces that are inside of Venezuela, also a lot of the movements from dissident Chavismo, from old school members of the regime, and people who actually believe that is a moment for a national consensus of closing the chapter of repression and dictatorship and opening for a transitional process inside of a country. But also, I think these numbers, what also shows is that Venezuelans has a clear decision made since before the presidential election of last year. You don't have a polarized country. You have a country in which the enormous majority of the society, no matter if they are opposition members, regime loyalists, or independent, all of them want a different future. Everyone voted on July 28 to close the chapter, and this situation that we're seeing right now, part of the support that has is because Venezuelans feels that we tried everything. Like we tried dialogues, we tried negotiations, we tried elections, we tried like any other way possible to avoid a hard outcome or this kind of situation that brought us to the current stage of a political dynamic in Venezuela, but also thinking about the Washington, D.C. dynamic and in general about these numbers in this city, I think it's more surprising for Americans than for Venezuelans. For Venezuelan people who have been following Venezuela, half of these slides are only confirming what we are sensing or feeling from our families, from the people on the ground. But sometimes Washington, D.C. creates an artificial conversation about the country that some people want us to have, and not the country that we actually have. So I saw a lot of people saying, if the US does a military action, it will be worse than Iraq, worse than Syria. It will be the next 80 of Latin America. It lasted 2 hours. And now you have the regime being the main, most prominent US deliverer that you have ever imagined on earth. People say, no, colectivos, paramilitaries are going to take the streets. It's going to be impossible to govern Venezuela if the US goes further. Well, they are there. They received the energy secretary. They took him to an oil pit. They had folkloric Venezuelan music receiving them. And as Luzmeli said, they went super fast from Yankee go home to Yankee, please, please, please come home and work with me. So what you see on the slides is also people trusting the US process that for now has the else in place, but the final stage of this process is an election and a transition in Venezuela. And that's why everyone is following this process with the hope that this will have the outcome that everyone wants, that is having a legitimate elected government by the Venezuelan people who can take who can run the country and start rebuilding institutions and the economy.
Thanks, Miguel. And I think also your answer reflects that for those who might have seen our event 2 weeks ago, where we had on February 3rd, we marked 1 month since Maduro's removal. We had a variety of voices of folks joining us from Caracas, giving their perspectives on the ground. I think it accurately reflects what you were sharing here as well, Miguel. And I'll also say Washington, D.C. conversations can be far from the reality, whether it's Venezuela or any other topic as well. Luzmeli, turning to you, how do citizens' participation how do citizens' perceptions, as you saw reflected in the poll, how does that interact from your perspective with the current media environment in Venezuela? You're on mute.
I think it's important what Miguel was telling about the decision that people was taking in 2022 and 2023. And what I realized covering Venezuela is that there is like a information resilience. Venezuela citizens had become deep seekers of information. Even the censorship and the self-censorship. For example, the 2023 primaries, it was extraordinary because nothing about the primary was covered by the TV and radio. But people found the way to vote and found the way to participate in this process. It's the same situation in 2024. In 2024, we have this Edmundo González Urrutia, who nobody knows in Venezuela, and he never could go to television or radio. And the campaign that Maria Corina Machado did in that moment, supporting him, made that he won the election. So for me, there is a learning of the citizens looking for the information. Another thing that I think is important to share is that the last January, our metrics grow more than 3 times. So for us, it means that people were looking for real information, around this uncertainty, around this darkness about the information. But people were looking information of a professional journalism. And there is other point that I would like to share. There is like the paradox of influence, the journalism environment, and the virality. Due to the censorship, there are a lot of influencer, a lot of producer content that they are delivering a lot of information or a lot of content, and sometimes we are the media, we can't support that because we have to verify that. But people are making looking for the nuance, and then they wait for the confirmation of the media. So for me, it's like an experiment that we are doing in Venezuela, trying to bring together this kind of economy of content creator in politics and situation of the independent ecosystem media.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luz Meli. Iris, we're talking about the information environment. I want to ask you, did you do so much surveillance? And then after that, I want to ask, I think one of the interesting findings as well from Mark's poll was, it's like in any country, right? Cost of living high, healthcare high, jobs high. So I want to reflect on that as well. But Iria, the poll results show that many Venezuelans see Delcy Rodriguez, assuming their presidency, is simply a continuity in many regards of Maduro's rule. Luz Meli was talking about the information environment. You do a lot of monitoring of the information environment. What does the current information surveillance environment in Venezuela? How is that playing out right now? Right? Is that the reporting is that things are getting better, but yet as Mark's poll showed, high concern about security, crime low, but insecurity high. So does the current information and surveillance environment in Venezuela reflect the attitudes that Delcy Rodriguez is simply a continuity of Maduro's rule?
Yeah, well, as Luz Meli said, I agree with many of her points. Venezuela had become very sophisticated information seekers because it was so hard to get information in the country. People developed networks of trust in the way to us to access information that they can trust. And that plays in this result we see. We see people who know what is happening, understand the complications, understand the complexity, that slide about how much people dislike Delcy Rodriguez and how much they agree, okay, this is what is going to be happening because X, Y, and Z is part of that. An informed citizenry knows what is happening, know the complexities, because they had been seeking for information and they had developed ways to access those information. In which case, one of the things is speaking about the Venezuelan information environment, the mainstream media, television, radio, broadcast radio is meaningless regarding access to news. So people don't go to those places for news. People go online for news. People go for digital outlets, go for their favorite journalists and their social media accounts. So, and for doing that, they need to use VPNs. Venezuela had the higher rate of VPNs adoptions in the continent because people really put effort in looking for information and seeing different sources and understanding what is going on, because their lives depends on understanding. News is no entertainment. Political news is not something that happens every 5 or 4 years when you go to vote. The political situation affects your lives. You can go to jail for saying the wrong thing. You can, so somebody in your family could be in danger, so you don't know what to do, where to do. So people are very aware of their surroundings. one is I was trying to understand the security ratings, and the only thing I can make is because people were being subject to the device searches. There were checkpoints around the main cities in which security forces asked people for their phone to load to their WhatsApp to see what news they are there.
You're referring to the 58% that feel the security situation is worse.
They feel that because they when they got to the street, there are some police or some plainclothes security operatives asking them what they are reading, what they are saying, what they are commenting, and that is part of the system of repression, and it's the low-tech surveillance can add to the very high-tech surveillance system Venezuela had is still intact. The surveillance, video surveillance around the cities in the street, the surveillance of the transactions that people make with their cars, the use of mechanisms of the drone surveillance patrolling the cities, the cyber patrolling of internet. Most of the security forces do cyber patrolling to control who is saying that, and when something became viral and is against the government, they may take a piece. They do the knock because people were saying that. So that is a part of the environment, and that surveillance environment in which they combine very high-tech things like drones and CCTV cameras, and very low-tech things like stopping the people in the street, asking them what they are reading and what they had in their phone, and other mechanisms like database which show the government what sickness they had, what welfare benefits they access, what kind of political affiliation they had, where they live, where they work, how they move in the city, because also the use of the services are also feeding those databases. All of that, people is very, very aware. All of that is used to profile them and can be used to put them in jail arbitrarily. So that is part of the environment which Venezuela have been living for years, and that is why they are very optimistic, very happy, but they don't go to the street to celebrate. They celebrate in private because they know it's still a risky situation because all the repressive apparatus is still there.
And one thing that you've written about, Iria, is also the fact that this repressive surveillance apparatus these are Chinese systems, and we also noted that in our memo to the president that I co-wrote with our ambassador historian General Richardson and Jeff Ramsey here. But that's very important. That helps to explain the reason that the security situation has gotten even worse, or perceptions of that. But yet crime, low at 3%. Miguel, I'd like to. One of the findings from the poll is looking at the economic recovery. This is obviously the President Trump's main priority right now, economic stability. We see that 62%, when you ask their top priorities, 62% say cost of living. And Mark can correct me if I'm getting the numbers wrong, but 62% cost of living, 44% healthcare, and number 3 is jobs at 35%. And I think, as you were saying in your previous answer as well, I would assume that these numbers are not surprising for maybe surprising for those who don't follow Venezuela on a day-to-day basis, but they're not surprising for Venezuelans because this is the situation that Venezuelans have been living. So how are you thinking about these numbers, and also what do these numbers mean for how opposition forces will continue to engage moving forward?
Yeah, I think first, when you see the top priorities of the people, their priorities is people's needs. Like, people is not talking about macroeconomy. People is not talking about institutional balance. People is talking about it's affecting their daily base. But also when you see the hope of people for democracy, it also is clear that people understand that the only way to have good jobs, to have good salaries, to have strong institutions, to have a strong healthcare is through a transitional process that leads us to democracy. Like, no Venezuelan on earth will say 6 months from now, because the economy is a little bit better, you know what? We prefer Delcy, and everything before was just a bad dream, and we prefer to stick to the regime. That is never going to happen in Venezuelan society, because we Venezuelans have learned the hard way, but we have learned that the only way to have a stable economy and the only way to have a stable pace of investments and income in Venezuela is with democracy and with a clear institutional balance inside of Venezuela. But also, you see sense of urgency. What you see in the poll is the Venezuelans asking to the rest of the world to share our sense of urgency. Because for what a lot of people started on January the 3rd, for Venezuelan people it started more than 20 years ago. And this is not the first time that we are hopeful. This is, I think, the biggest hope that we have had in a long time. But the sense of urgency also comes from this sociological sense of waiting for the trick to happen. And if you talk with a Venezuelan now and ask when you won the election, they will say tomorrow. And when you won the final stage of the Marco Rubio and Donald Trump process to work, yesterday. And it's not because the Venezuelans doesn't trust the process. It's not because they don't support the President Trump policy or the Secretary of State design for the 3 stages. It's because we are used to the regime cheating. And we are used to a regime trying to do everything to gain time and to get out of the corner in which they are. I think now the corner is bigger and they are smaller than where they used to be, but there's still a good attempt from the regime to try to mimic that they are complying with everything that is asked from them, but at the end not delivering the final stage of what they have to do. And one last thing about what people say, and to reinforce what Iri and Luzmeli said. When we Venezuelans talk about security, we're not talking about gangs. We're talking about intelligence, counterintelligence officers, national police, non-state armed groups called colectivos that are Venezuelan paramilitaries, like the ones who kidnapped Juan Pablo Guanipa after being released from jail last week, because that is what we are scared of. It's not the old school crime that people know in the US, it's a state-sponsored crime and repression, what people is scared of in Venezuela.
Miguel, very, very excellent points. Thank you so much. We have about 8 minutes. I'm going to bring in a question that we got over askac.org. And this is actually a video question, and I'll have...
they do the challenge. You challenge it.
We're not actually getting the sound on this. We will try to...
It's about documentation for traveling, if you want me to address that.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, super short. There's a lot of Venezuelans that in the current circumstances doesn't have a paper for IDs, passports. Part of what we are facing in Venezuela is the denial of identity, the denial of our right to be citizens. I don't have a Venezuelan passport or Venezuelan ID because of a regime decision, but millions of Venezuelans right now doesn't have access to that. We have been actively working with different countries to find a way around this. In the case of the US government accepts the expired passport for up to 10 years, which is an exception regarding other countries, and it's because they know that this is a political decision, what is happening in Venezuela. The same in the European Union. In most of the countries, we have managed, Spain, Portugal, Italy, to persuade the governments to accept expired passports for regularization. But again, what we need is not a particular solution for a particular problem. What we need is an integral solution for a huge problem. Yeah. That is identity, and it's related to the political future of Venezuela.
Great, thank you so much, Miguel. Luzmeli, I want to go back to you. The poll shows optimism, we talked about in the beginning, but also uncertainty about governance. What do you think Venezuelans will watch most closely in the coming months? And please take yourself off mute.
In Spanish, I would say la bola de cristal. No?
Crystal ball.
I don't know how to say.
The crystal ball. We'll all be watching the crystal ball.
Yes, but I think that as Iria and Miguel told, that we are dealing with a lot of issues in Venezuela, not only the economical issue, but of course the security issue. So for me, if people is paying attention, or they are very optimistic about the economical situation, they are waiting that that optimism could be make reality. So in the next month, for example, people is going to ask about the raise of the wage, of the general wage, for example, better public services, and some of these kind of things that they realize that we are living in this kind of war economy. So I think the expectation about improving, of the economical improving, are going to push very, very strong to the government. And another thing that I think it could be, we have to pay attention is the tensions that we are note between the force inside the government. I begin this conversation making a joke, and Miguel, we were talking about the phrase or the joke about how the government, the anti-imperialism governments say before in December, Yankee or Gringo go home, and now they are telling, okay, Gringo, come home. So this kind of change is having an impact inside of the Chavismo or inside of the Madurismo. I don't know how to call right now that movement. But I think we are going to pay attention about that, especially because the next step about the political release of prisoners is going to have for the military prisoners. So there are more than 180 people, military people on jail. So they are going to have to be released. This kind of decision is going to impact inside of the military force.
Thank you so much, Luis Meli. We have time for probably about one or two questions. I'm going to, just because he's sitting here in the front row, I'm going to take a question from Roger Noriega, and I'll maybe direct this question at you, Miguel. As impressive as MCM numbers are on the poll, what would her margin be in an election in which Venezuelans now in exile are allowed to vote? When does MCM need to consider returning to the country?
Thank you, Roger. That is a really good question because it's often forgotten that 1/3 of our country is outside of Venezuela. So any poll that you do is still missing at least another 20-30% of vote intention for MCM when they measure that. We always said that on July 28, if the Venezuelan diaspora was allowed to vote, that result would have been 90% against 10%. And it will reflect the society consensus about political change. I think that will be the number if you can add the people from the diaspora in order to measure the vote intention. But also, I think there's something that is also harder to perceive in a poll. That is, there's people that right now can answer Delcy in the poll because someone is interviewing them at home with Dijesim, Sevin, and the repressive apparatus is still ongoing on the streets. And even when they trust the pollster, even when they trust the survey, some people is still trying to protect themselves in this situation. In the moment you dismantle the repressive apparatus, in the moment Diosdado Cabello is no longer there, and you can easily point to the people that the time of repression is over and they can freely express themselves, I think also those numbers that give the regime 20%, 25% sometimes will go down to 10% because there's a lot of people that feels the pressure to deliver that kind of answer. And then about the MCM return to the country, she has been super clear that she wants to go back as soon as possible. And she wants to go back not to be on a safe house. She wants to go back to be able to rally on the streets, to organize people, and to also to help to guide this process that will need political presence on the ground to make sure that everyone can follow step by step how this unfolds. Also, right now, she's super useful here in Washington, D.C. There's a kind of conversation that only she can have at a level that only she can access. And I think that that kind of interactions that she's doing here in Washington, not only with the US government, that is the most prominent and most important part of her interactions, but also with the oil industry, with the financial sector, with people in the big tech world, with people in the minerals world, is really useful and important to build the base about what's coming. We are not asking the US and the international community to do a leap of faith, to gamble into uncertainty. What we're trying to make sure is that everyone, from the US government to the biggest investors to all the stakeholders related to Venezuela, everyone is convinced that we know how to govern, that we understand the country that we are going to inherit and how to guide that country, and that all the challenges that we have been for that, and not only the hope and desire that things are going to go good only because we are in democracy. Thank you, Ray.
Great, thank you, Miguel. We have one specific question for Mark, and so I'm going to go live here with Mark. Essentially, the question for you is, from Alexandra here. What would happen if in the end the U.S. decides to keep Delcy? I think the question is kind of what would happen? How do you see that kind of potentially reflected? And if you were going to do another round of polling, how would that transpire?
I mean, I guess I would go beyond the poll and suggest that's not really a plausible option for the United States, given public opinion of Venezuela. I think from the perspective of the State Department, this policy will only be successful if ultimately there's a democratic transition and democratic elected government in place in the next couple of years. But I think there is a question, and Miguel addressed this a bit, what if Venezuela experiences double-digit growth this year in GDP, which is not impossible, given the baseline is starting from. What would those numbers mean politically for Delcy and her movement? Now, I can't see a situation in which she's able to close the gap with Maria Corina. No way. But does it help to revive the Chavista movement somewhat? Is that not necessarily a bad thing if you have a sort of a reform social democratic movement within the country on the left? But again, that's speculation. But I don't think, again, given the strong desire for a accelerated transition, especially elections this year, I don't see it as feasible for the United States to be delaying too much longer in terms of scheduling an election.
Thanks, Mark. We're out of time. I want to give anyone on the panel a 30-second. If you have a 30-second closing you want to give to wrap up the conversation. Maybe I'll start with you, Luz Melli. You're via video and text. A quick 30-second closing thought.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would like to disagree with Miguel about the role of Maria Corina Machado, because it's very extraordinary that the support that she is having right now in Venezuela continuing since 2022. But as I think that the Venezuelan people is looking for political direction. So when we see last week, we can see that when Juan Carlos Guanipa was released, he go around the jails and where the political prisoners were, and people was following him. Even that we are not the same thing with the students, that they are in the front of this political moment. For me, the Maria Corina Machado is going to be more useful in Venezuela than in the state, because in the state she has a very great team, as Miguel is there, Smolansky, and other people. For the important thing for me right now, following the result of the polls, is how to organize the movement in Venezuela, the civil movement in Venezuela, asking for a democratic transition, which right now we don't have this path clearly.
Thank you. Thanks, Luz Melli. And I'll also say that one of the points we put out in our memo with the president a week or two ago was that they need to provide the conditions so that Maria Corina can return to Venezuela and do so in a safe way. Iria, and I'll give it to you, Miguel, to close.
Venezuelans at the moment looking forward to political liberalization. People are hopeful about the change of the economic situation with the oil trade coming with the United States, but they are very much expecting change in the political side. As some of these things can be signals, strong signals that we are moving in the right direction regarding political change, is the liberation of political prisoners and the dismantling of this censorship apparatus, seeing how the head of the repressive agencies like the SEBIN or the DGCIN are changing for somebody a little bit more palatable. Those are strong signs, but I would agree with this Mayor Reyes. People are looking forward to have Maria Corina Machado leading them in districts.
But really important point on looking at some of those signals of change in some of these repressive institutions within Venezuela. Miguel.
I will try to do 30 seconds. But first, I think it's not binary. What Luzmeli just said, we totally agree that the most important part of Maria Corina leadership is inside of a country. We have a say in Venezuela. We'll do rough translation, but the only way to eat an elephant is by pieces. And we are right now like on half of a sashimi of the elephant. So of course, we want Maria Corina back into the country, but we need to make sure that we eat the part of the elephant that keeps her on the US too, in order for Venezuela to be efficient and to move in the right way. Super short to close, Jason. First, we are a united country. We are not polarized. We are not divided. We are not in the midst of a civil war. We have an important consensus about future, hope, and change. Second, we have to recognize human sacrifice. It's easy to talk here in Washington, D.C. It's easy to have a frappuccino sometime in a lobby of an NGO or a government institution. We have 600 people in jail still in Venezuela. We have still people disappeared and being tortured in Venezuela. We have people who cannot express themselves freely in Venezuela and do this, what we are doing here, inside of a country in any normal way. That sacrifice also involves people like Edmundo González Urrutia, our president-elect, whose son-in-law was arrested until a couple weeks ago, and whose family is not able to go back to the country. And last, Jason, when you be patient with us, because when you see us with sense of urgency, with anxiety, trying to push everyone to move faster and to move harder, and you think, well, it's only 1 month after January the 3rd, remember that for Venezuelans, this has more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So every time we push, every time we demand, every time we ask, it's not because we woke up on January the 3rd and suddenly we think like everything has to be faster. It's because we started this way before some people got involved in the situation. So thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I want to thank you. I want to thank Iria, Luzmeli, and of course Mark for not only coming and presenting the findings here, but also just for an excellent poll that you can find. Spend the rest of the day going through all the results, and then email Mark with your questions that'll be available on our website. You know, part of the work that we do here, our work started almost a decade ago. Our work on Venezuela. Many of you in the room have been or watching it on TV, ACTV, have been part of that, and looking at that economic stabilization. In order to get that economic stabilization in the end, you need trust in that system of government, right? And that's what investors are looking for: stability in government, and eventually in a democratic transition, which is so fundamental. You also mentioned, Miguel, the importance. You mentioned the political prisoners. I need to mention as well the importance of verifying the announcements that are coming out of Caracas. That's absolutely fundamental. Look at Foro Penal, look at other sources to verify what's coming out. So stay tuned for more public programming and other products coming out of the Atlantic Council as part of Venezuela Forward. Quick teaser, I think we already have 1 or 2 events already planned for March. So mark your calendar. So thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.